Spanish, the most spoken of the Romance languages worldwide. So many people love hearing the language, and so many people speak it. And yet, as I stand here being a Puerto Rican, I know wholeheartedly that I can't speak it. I can't, for the most part, understand it. I can read it, though I don't know what I'm reading. And I probably could write it if I tried. The irony. The Puerto Rican who can't speak Spanish. However, there are people like myself, Hispanics, that can't follow along in a conversation that is spoken in Spanish, can't speak it, can't engage with someone who speaks it. And I've come a long way learning tricks on how to follow a conversation simply by listening to the flow, the enunciation of words, the inflection of the voice. Some words I can recognize, and I can start piecing together a very staggered puzzle of the conversation between two people or more, just so I can have an idea of what the hell's going on. This has not been easy for me, and I've been wanting to discuss this for a long time, so fuck it. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about the Puerto Rican that can't speak Spanish. Okay. Well, shit, if we're gonna get vulnerable, let's get vulnerable, huh? It's a topic that I've been wanting to discuss on the Chronicles as part of my journey, but I've been avoiding it simultaneously. I think because I know how hard it is for me to really talk about something like this. And to be quite honest, this is the first time I'm going to be talking about it where X amount of people will hear it. Usually it's in a private conversation or a small gathering of people. But what are we talking about? We're talking about the Spanish language. And we're talking about, for myself growing up as a Puerto Rican, not knowing the language. And a lot of the things that I felt growing up, I'd like to touch on that. Even as an adult, the questions that I would hear growing up, the questions that I get now. This topic was kind of ignited about a week or so ago. My wife and I are selling a car, and we've got people interested, a lot of people actually, because, at the time right now, it's a seller's market right now. Not necessarily a buyer's market, but anyway. We had a gentleman come look at the car, and he spoke Spanish. And the gentleman comes, and my wife tells me, he says he's here. My wife is at the moment in the kitchen tending to our daughter. So I go out to discuss, the car with this gentleman. My wife tells me that he sounded, Hispanic, Latino. He had an accent or whatever. I can't really recall the details. But anyway, in a very familiar conversation that I have with my wife very often, it goes along the lines of, if you can't speak English, let me know. I'll go out there and talk with him, because my wife is bilingual. My wife is also Puerto Rican, and she can speak Spanish. So I go out there, and we're talking right away. I can tell he's that he could speak English, just not that well. And so I explained that I can't speak Spanish not that well, and he, obviously jokes around that he can't speak English that well. He gets in the car with me. He test drives the car. We're talking about the car. He kind of talks about me not speaking Spanish, but it was really, really quick. I'm not really too caught up in what he's asking me about speaking Spanish because I'm really just trying to get this car sold. But as we come back to the house and he parks, he walks out. He's looking at the car. He gets on the phone with, I'm assuming it's his son or his son-in-law. That's the person that's actually interested in the car. So he must have came by to take a look at it for said person. And he's speaking in Spanish. So my wife by this point is outside with the girls. She's kind of giving me a rundown of what he's talking about on the phone so that I'm, not lost here. And he's pretty much just telling the guy on the phone what he thinks about the car, this, that, and the third. And he looks over at our daughter and he waves hi, our little one, our 1-year-old. And he speaks with my wife, all in Spanish. And then he leaves. And as he leaves, he points to my daughter. He was like, make sure you teach her. And he looks at her, he looks at me. As he says goodbye, he looks over at me. And he has this smirk on his face that I recall that I've seen so many other times in my life. Generally from another Hispanic. And he kind of smirks and he waves. He says, "Adios, amigo." And, I knew what that meant. He was being very nice. He wasn't disrespectful, but it was also a playful dig that I've experienced numerous times throughout my life. Simply because I'm Puerto Rican and I can't speak Spanish. I can't understand it for the most part. There are some words and phrases that I recognize that I can say, but it's hard. It's tough. It's tough. My mom and my dad, I think this was more so a decision on my mom's part. Why my dad didn't make an effort on his part, I don't know. But I know my mom grew up in Puerto Rico and came to the States. She was actually born in Lancaster and then moved to Puerto Rico when she was less than 1 year old, and then came back when she was in second grade. So when she comes back, she only speaks Spanish. Had a very difficult time in school. My mom had a very difficult time in school, very traumatizing. And I don't want to kind of get into the ebbs and flows of that, because it's suffice to say that it was traumatizing for my mom. It was very difficult, enough for my mom to remind herself as she would get older that if she had kids, she would teach them English first so that they wouldn't have a tough time in school. And that's really what it comes down to. My mom has spent years apologizing that she didn't take the time to teach me both, but it is what it is, right? I've been old enough now to learn it on my own, and I haven't. And for whatever reason, I haven't, and it is what it is. I've never really thought about it, until I married Alexandra. Alexandra's, 100% Puerto Rican. Her family speaks Spanish and English. My wife speaks both Spanish and English. She speaks more English than Spanish, but she can still speak Spanish. And I think having that relationship with my wife and in-laws, where the Spanish language is more relevant and present, it makes me think more that I wish I would have taken that time to learn it more as an adult, but I was really, really jaded, and I think it's safe to say I'm still jaded, really, with the whole experience of dealing with other Hispanics, other Puerto Ricans. The ridicule that I got. The irony is, or the sad truth, I should say, was that to the racist white people that I confronted in my youth growing up, they had no problem recognizing me as a Puerto Rican or Hispanic, right? They had no problem recognizing that and confronting me about it, treating me as such, but yet I wasn't given that recognition from some other Hispanics. Time and time again, I would be told that I'm not really Puerto Rican because I can't speak Spanish. And that shit sucked. That shit sucks to this day to hear. And it's something I don't know. A part of me can understand why somebody would be concerned that somebody being another Hispanic would be concerned that, a lot of Puerto Ricans, or other Hispanic groups can't speak Spanish because, of course, you want to maintain your culture. You want to preserve your culture and its authenticity and its pureness, and you want to pass it on to your children and to the generations that are coming to continue it. And I get that. Trust me, I do. I just can't see where somebody would get the gall to suggest that I'm not really Hispanic because of ABC. You know what I mean? I never understood how somebody could just stand on the soapbox, so to speak, and be so judgmental. So as much as I was dealing with, as a youth, I was dealing with, white kids, not a lot, but there were some, or white adults treating me differently because I was Puerto Rican. Some very forward, and some being very passive aggressive or subliminally, throwing these darts at me. And then there were just Hispanics that were just, Puerto Ricans that were very, very honest about their displeasure with me as a child. There were people in the church that I went to that would always get on me. And I'm sure my parents got a fair share of the criticism as well. And the truth is I wasn't in my parents' shoes at that time. I was just a kid. I don't know what was going on. I don't know what the level of trauma that my mom experienced in school as a child that pushed her so hard to want to make sure I learned English first. But it happened, and she made sure I learned English first. And you have to understand also that even though my mom and her family were a predominantly Spanish-speaking family at first, as they transitioned into America, into Pennsylvania, into Lancaster, and the elders grew and the children grew to become adults, and then grandchildren came into the picture, English started to become more of the dominant language within our family. Even my grandparents would be speaking it more. And so it's this double-edged sword where you learn a second language so that you can prosper and grow in this country, so you can facilitate, navigate, and do what you got to do without any issues, without any hurdles. And then your children learn that language, and then what happens is you start to lose the primary language that was Spanish. And there are a lot of families out there that make sure they don't do that. There are a lot of families out there that teach both languages. I think that's fantastic. I have friends that have children that know both English and Spanish, or English and another language, a bilingual or trilingual, however you want to call it. I think it's fucking awesome and fantastic that it can be done, and that it is done, and that these families are doing that. But on the other hand, it doesn't happen all the time, and I just don't think it's fair to, quite frankly, shit on these families. It's an exhausting game of having to explain it. And I've been blessed to meet a lot of cool and understanding people. And I've also, I guess I could say, I've been blessed to meet a lot of ignorant, narrow-minded people, because it's helped me to become a better person myself. Even in my household now, with my wife and my children, none of my children speak Spanish fluently. My first two children are biracial. They're half white and half Puerto Rican. And then my two little girls that I have with Alexandra are full Puerto Rican. And we're teaching them Spanish, but even yet and still, I can only do so much. But the household that we live in, my wife, myself, my in-laws, my mom, when she visits, my sister, my mom and her husband, they all speak English. Even my stepfather, who speaks English, not as well, but a lot better than what he did, 20 years ago when I met him. He would still prefer Spanish, but he could still speak in English. But it's there. The Spanish is there, just not so much. And so it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, so to speak, for me. Moments like, what happened with the gentleman coming to look at the car really reignite this old flame inside me that it burns. It kind of works on me, because very seldom through my experience was I ever offered help or guidance from anybody that could speak Spanish. It was more, it was a lot easier for people to question and make fun of me. And, even when I do try to speak it may not be spoken correctly, and I get the little laughs. And that, as an adult, I can take it. It's no big deal. But it does rub me the wrong way enough to where I'm like, well, then fuck it. I'm not going to try to speak Spanish anymore. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go through that. And you can say that's childish or that I'm giving up too easily. But I mean, listen, I'm telling you about something that I've been dealing with for 43 years in a small little vacuum here. Cut me some slack. But I've always been envious of my family and friends that could speak Spanish. I think it's such an awesome thing to know two different languages. I don't know what that's like. But with that being said, when there's a conversation taking place in Spanish, I can get a gist of what's going on when I start paying attention, and I'm catching certain words, where those words are placed in the sentence. Kind of gives me an idea, right, of what's going on. And so it's very, very common for my in-laws and my wife to be speaking in Spanish. I won't engage because I can't speak it, but I will follow along and respond every now and then in English. I do have that capacity. Same thing with my mom and the family I grew up with. If I hear people speaking in Spanish, I will follow along. My experiences at work have always been typical of oh, you're Puerto Rican, and then they start speaking to me in Spanish, and I have to explain the whole shit show. And I either get you don't speak Spanish, or it's all good, I can speak English, and then if I form a friendship with somebody I'm working with, I typically would be like, hey, would you mind just saying it in Spanish? Let me learn. But it's very rare that happens for me because I'm being vulnerable with people, and I don't like doing that. That's the experience. And I've learned from people at work, people I work with that speak Spanish. If I was training them, for example, I would try to speak Spanish to them to help the training process. But by doing that, that's opening a door then where they think, oh, I speak fluent Spanish, and then I have to explain it's a fucking shit show. But that part of my life has always been, oh my God, has been fucking exhausting. Pardon the language, but my God, it's exhausting. And the thing is, I've never been, I was never salty towards my parents. I didn't hold any resentment to my mom. I never resented her decision. I completely fucking get it. Completely get it. I mean, look, she didn't want me to have any trouble in school, and I didn't. I flew through school. I just ended up having issues because I was lazy. But I always read very well. I could always write very well. I could speak well. I learned the English language, and I was able to cope. And school was difficult for me like it was for my mom. So my mom's goal was achieved. She tells me now that she just wishes that she would have stuck to her guns with the Spanish. I think my dad really wanted to make sure we learned Spanish, and I get that. But I mean, neither of my parents really taught me Spanish. But it is what it is. The older family, the older generations, they would be a little bit more picky about myself not knowing Spanish, my sisters not knowing it that well. I have cousins that don't speak it. This is not just a me thing. It's a generational thing, and it's a generational thing where you have Hispanic kids that don't know the language, and or they do because their parents taught them both. Again, I think that's great. So where I'm at now in my life is where I'm really, really trying to learn it. But I got to tell you, it's hard. It's harder the older you get. It's not impossible, and I understand that, but it's hard, and the Spanish language can be difficult to understand the different ways of using the words and whatnot. But then again, look at English. That's got to be the most complex, fucking confusing language ever. It doesn't bother me as much now as it did, 20 years ago. It does bother me that my kids don't know it, but also it is what it is. I can only do so much, but the effort, I can make an effort to try, and I'm going to. And I have to be very, I got to give myself grace. That's what it comes down to. When I have friends and family that speak Spanish, I'm always paying attention to them. I don't ever really bring it up because it's just an awkward thing to bring up to somebody. Can you imagine me talking to family or my wife's family and just being like, hey, by the way, what you were just saying, I was watching your lips move, and I was trying to pay attention to the words. Can you speak up a little bit more? I'm not going to do that. But I do. I think it's so fucking dope. the Spanish language, when you can let it rip, this, how all the words just flow so smoothly. And I listen to everybody in my family speak it, and they speak it fast. It's like, holy shit. How the fuck am I going to learn that? How am I going to learn that? Well, I guess I got to try. So, if you're ever wondering why I've never spoken Spanish on the podcast, that's why. There's the reason why. But that's not going to stop me from, inviting Spanish speaking people on my show. Hopefully they can speak some English. That's all I got. Like I said, I'm grateful that I made it to a point in my life where I'm happy with where I'm at, even though I don't speak Spanish fluently, and I can follow conversation for the most part. Maybe not even that. I can follow a conversation sort of, but it's definitely not as hard as it used to be when I was younger. I mean, the judgment in the Hispanic communities with each other is difficult. It's very hard. There's no love sometimes, and that's very narrow-minded thinking when they immediately revoke your Puerto Rican card because you can't speak Spanish. There's a lot of people that can speak Spanish and they don't really know much about the culture or the history of our people. And I try to know as much as I can. I love who I am. I love being Puerto Rican. Love the music and the history and the culture. I love the stories of my grandparents and the traditions that I hear my mom tell me about the stories in Puerto Rico. I think the biggest misconstrued belief about Hispanics that don't speak Spanish is that we don't like being Hispanic. That's a fucking stupid ass assumption. I'm not speaking for all. I'm just assuming that, for the most part, we love being who we are. It's just, the roll of the dice. I think a little bit of less judging and more helping, maybe. My wife is a great help. But sometimes she doesn't forget that I don't speak. I think she may forget that I'm looking at her for a translation, because we could be at a party and somebody could be speaking. I'm typically going to not say anything and just listen, but then I'm going to hope that somebody fills me. Somebody fills me in. I'd say about 98% of the time my wife is right there. So she's been a big help. I think, when you get involved in the conversation and it goes back and forth, you're not thinking to stop and translate every word. I get it. So if you've got, Hispanic friends, you've got Puerto Rican friends, Mexican friends, I don't know, they don't speak Spanish, don't shit on them. Ask why. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. It's cool. All right, fuck it. It is what it is. And on the flip side, if you've got Hispanic friends that can't speak English that well, and they're trying to speak English, but it's all they know is Spanish, help them out. Help them out. And understand this. They're trying to speak a second language, and they're making it work the best they can. They're navigating in this country. I know a lot of people that, people I used to work with, different places, would shit on people who had broken English. Understand that broken English is their second language. A lot of us are just fucking around with one. So anyway, that's that. I think that's as far as I'm going to go with this one. Not too long, but I've been meaning to share this. Hopefully it sheds some light on myself for some of you who may be wondering. My parents did the best they could, and I'm doing the best I can with my wife Alexandra, with our children, and everything's gonna be all right. That's how I look at it. I'll still say words here and there that I know in Spanish, and I'll continue to love being Puerto Rican and love being who I am, comfortable in my own skin. So y'all be safe. Remember to maintain focus and stay continuous through all 4 seasons. Do you guys even know what the fuck that means, man? That means non-stop. You know what I mean? Through all 4 seasons, you just keep going. You gotta stay continuous. I love y'all. Y'all be safe. Peace.